Joined now by Kevin Sweeney from College Basketball Central, as he does each and every Monday. Kevin, how's it going, brother?
Good, guys. How are you?
Good. Slower weekend, finally. It slowed down. Things are just kind of – water has found its level at the moment. Unfortunately for Indiana, it has not been a good portal run, as not only do they lose out on one of their major targets, but actually every major target that they have targeted. The two guards to Tennessee, Chris Liedlam and Dalton Knecht. That was a big loss for the Hoosiers, but a great gain for Tennessee, not picking up just one, but both of those guys. Man, what does that do for the Volunteers?
It's a big boost, and kind of what they struggled with last year was just like consistent offensive production. And Ledlam's a guy who can really score in isolation, and they can give him the ball and he can go, back you down. And Knecht is an elite shooter and, ball mover and spacer. So those guys will help them a lot. I mean, they have a good group coming back. Some question marks. They're still waiting to hear what Julian Phillips will do in the draft, but they have Zakai Ziegler and Santiago Vescovi back in the backcourt. They're old and athletic in the front court. Like they've got some pieces now to be a top 15 level team. And I think they were in good position to be in that top 25 mix before these two portal ads. And then these are just kind of the cherry on top.
Tennessee seems to be, I don't want to say like Virginia, but they're not exactly seem to be the highest scoring team. I mean, I always thought he ran a higher octane offense, but Stevens comments as if they're more like Virginia and that they're more defensive. Is that your take on Tennessee?
I mean, it's certainly what they were last year, and they've been the last couple of seasons. I don't think that's necessarily I don't think it's necessarily kind of ingrained in the culture the way that it is with Virginia, but I think it's just been like what they've wound up with the last few years is like incredibly athletic, incredibly physical teams, right? Like they post a picture every year on social media over the summer of their entire team in the weight room shirtless, and it looks like a football team out there. Like they are that like physically imposing, and Ledlam really fits into that mold more than Knecht, who is truly a skill guy, first, second, and third. And so, I mean, I think it's a little surprising that they're able to reel in both, but I don't think that I certainly think Rick Barnes can coach offense. I think they've had good players. Obviously, they've produced NBA players there, and guys like Grant Williams more recently who have stuck in the league. So, I mean, they have a lot to sell. They have obviously SEC level NIL. They have they've recruited 5 stars. They've produced NBA players. Like they've got a lot to sell. I think it was just probably more surprising to get both than it was that they could steal one.
What about style of play, Big Ten versus SEC? Do you think that weighed into any of this?
I don't know. I don't think so. Like I think that's not usually the thing that comes up when you talk to kids about their decisions. That doesn't mean that it's not there somewhere. But I think, and maybe this is something that will change, particularly because of some of the guys that the Big Ten's gotten in the portal. But I think like the SEC has become kind of it's a talent first league. Like I was talking to an SEC coach at the Final Four, and he said the biggest thing he was surprised by when he got there was how much less offense teams run than they do in other leagues. Like it's a lot of just kind of free flowing, like getting to your pick and roll stuff. We roll the ball out and see what works. So I'm not necessarily sure guys are sold like, oh man, like like you're gonna go play in the Big Ten, it's gonna be stuffy, it's gonna be physical. You don't want that. But I think it's more so like, hey, come to the SEC. We're gonna let you play free. We're gonna let you play to your strengths. And I can't imagine that hurts in the recruiting sales pitch.
Justin.
And we've been talking about Indiana now looking at potentially Trey White from the transfer portal and USC. What kind of game would he bring to Indiana? How important is a player like him to add to Mike Woodson's roster?
I mean, I'm a huge Trey White fan. I mean, he was a top 50-ish recruit, comes in, plays in the rotation as a freshman, impacts winning. He's not a great shooter. I think that's the one thing I think you were looking at with particularly Knecht was a guy who could, just purely space the floor. But, a guy like Trey White would certainly be a good replacement. I think would probably wind up, in my opinion, would be a better addition than a guy like Chris Ledlam. Now, the competition will be fierce. I mean, again, if you can get a 3-year eligibility top 50 recruit who is productive in the Pac-12 already. Like there's the line's gonna be out the door, but Indiana's gonna have a shot because they're Indiana, and I think he would obviously be a big addition. Again, it wouldn't solve the floor spacing concerns, but he'd give you that like versatile combo forward that everyone could use.
Indiana still with 3 spots to fill, 2 freshmen coming in, part of that. Now we know that they have made offers to a couple of other new guys in the 24 class. Jaden Mustaf, who is looking to get a visit to Indiana this summer, playing on the Nike EYBL tour right now at 16, 6, and 4 over the weekend in a game. He's a good one. I think he's a 6'6" guard. Yeah. Playing, and his teammate, Austin Schwartz, a 6'4" guard, also guard, received an offer from Indiana over the weekend. So Indiana hunting guards, but now have they, switched their focus to 24 players? I just think that they need plug and play guys right now.
I don't think they necessarily have, right? I mean, it was a big EYBL weekend. Not every staff went out this weekend. I know some schools who had official visitors and they said, like, we're going to stay home. We're going to worry about 24 and 25 later. But, I think around the country, like, you can look at the list, like, John Shire and John Calipari and like you name a head coach, they were out at EYBL this weekend. And so I think like multitasking kind of has to be part of the conversation. And you kind of pick up the portal again on Sunday night. And quite frankly, a recruiting weekend these days is less about evaluation and more about being seen. And so quite honestly, like there's a pretty good chance that Mike Woodson and the Indiana staff are sitting courtside at, whichever EYBL game they're at, and they're texting kids in the portal the whole time, right? Like their polos there, people see, oh, there's Woody. All right, moving on. Let's make sure we're recruiting for 23.
Yeah, that's why every time you see these guys, they're all wearing their gear. The only guy that would crack me up was Mike Bray. Man, he would show up, look unshaven, T-shirt, just blending in with the people. He's just one of the peeps. But these guys are always sitting under the baskets with their gear on. And how important is that to these players, seeing these guys, seeing them?
Yeah, I was talking to a coach about this last summer, and our kind of consensus was it's really not as important now, or won't be as important going forward because of NIL, right? Like when people are making more of like a financial decision, there's less of all this like, oh, well, he was there for me from the start and he comes to all my games and he sits courtside and texts me post game and, oh, I love him so much, right? Like you cut away a lot of the noise and you just say, all right, like they're paying me $300,000, they're paying me $200,000. I'm choosing the $300,000, right? So I think it obviously is important. I think it gets a lot of schools, quite honestly, in trouble because the focus when they go out and recruit is so much on let me just be there that sometimes like they forget to keep evaluating and keep making sure they don't like why do kids go under the radar? It's because there's 100 coaches at a recruiting event and 80 of them already know the kid that they like and they're not changing their mind, right? Like if there's a lot that can change in a summer, and I think a lot of times there are kids that are like coaches are sitting there watching and they're not moving the needle because the coaches really aren't watching. They're just being there to, be a billboard for their programs.
Is there a sense of urgency from these coaches? Past, like I feel like with the development of recruiting websites and the implementation of NIL and the transfer portal, is there an urgency for coaches to maybe not go for those under the radar players because they know they have to, maybe they're on a shorter leash. They know they have to win now, especially if you're in a power program like the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, something along those lines, as opposed to, you know what, I'm going to take this guy and maybe he's not going to play as a freshman, but 2 or 3 years down the road, he's going to be a darn good player. I mean, I know that there are some coaches, and it seems like a lot of them are in the Big Ten, that still use that philosophy and are okay with, you know what, this guy's going to be 2-3 years, but it seems like to me a lot of guys are going to the transfer portal or on the recruiting trail and just trying to get those 2 to 3 pieces who can can plug and play immediately to try to find immediate success when maybe that's not the best strategy.
I think that's true. I think, look, I think about it this way. If you're a coach recruiting a freshman right now, you're going to invest potentially like 6+ months into recruiting that kid. You're going to call him every day. You're going to talk to him. You're going to go through the April and June and July. You're going to get him on an unofficial visit in June. You're going to get him on an official visit in August. He's going to commit in September, right? Like, that was a long process and a lot of labor, right? So if you're going to invest that amount of time in a kid, instead of in the portal where it's like, all right, Trey White goes in the portal. We call Trey White. We call him every day until he commits in 2 weeks, right? Like, the kid better be good, right? Because I think you're seeing a lot of wasted resources where schools are doing like the traditional long sell with freshmen, and then the kid's coming for a year. They're not playing. You would never have expected them to play based on the depth chart, right? It's their first year in the program. There's these old guys in front of you. Then they bounce. It's like, all right, well, what was the point of that? And you're to wake up again on April 15th and do the same thing over again. I think at some point you start to say, all right, like if we've got a kid we think can make a real impact that we really need in our program, we're gonna do the full sell. And if not, like, maybe we'll swoop in and take them late if we see them, if they're available and we really like their game. But we're not gonna do the long-term kind of marriage sell with these guys if we're not gonna get that type of loyalty back.
So now, where the portal is kind of really slowing down, a lot of the deals have been made. Who is still out there that is an elite guy that is really just kind of still dangling, or any of those guys still out there that really make you want to give them the spot? Indiana has 3 spots to fill. Like I said, you don't, unless it's a 1-year guy, you're not going to just give that and use it, but there's no sense in not using it if you can get a 1-year guy. But even like a guy like Jalen Deloche, who they waffled on because he was, he wasn't the shooter that they need. I get, but it was another body that you possibly could have used, but he's gone, committed elsewhere already. So they still have these 3 open spots, and they still have the desperate need for shooters on the wing position.
Yeah, I think there's still a little bit of star power out there. You mentioned Trey White, like that's a top 20 transfer in the class per ESPN. Jalen Tyson from Texas Tech, another guy who went in relatively recently. Big wing, shot 40% from 3, averaged 11 and 6. He's a good player, right? Like, those guys help you a lot. And I think also, like, as you go, and this isn't the thing that anyone wants to hear, but I think at some point you probably do, to a certain extent. You just have to. You really have to work your way down the list and say, okay, who can help us as a role player, right? Like, who's a guy who will come in, be happy to be at Indiana, and give us some sort of level of just contribution. And like, can I get a guy who's just like a straight shooter? Can I get a guy who is a 5-point a game contributor who wants to be in Indiana? And if you can get that, I think it's a win.